The Catholic communion ceremony is based on a far older Egyptian ritual, which is an offering to Osiris. So it became kind of interesting that Buzz Aldrin would be making an offering to Osiris on the moon before he went out for his spacewalk. Now, what we were able to do, or what they were able to do at the time, this was also, by the way, in the miniseries, the great HBO miniseries From the Earth to the Moon, the Tom Hanks show. This ceremony was shown, and this is the only time it's ever been dramatically presented to my knowledge. It shows Buzz pulling the thing out of his kit, pouring the wine in the little holy grail that he brought with him there, and taking communion. And I don't have the picture in here, but the Armstrong character looks at him like, "Are you out of your freaking mind?" And I think it's important to note, and well, we'll talk about it later, but he also, Buzz Aldrin does note in the book that, Armstrong looked at him like, "What are you up to now?" when he did this. Fortunately, however, there is now something called the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal, and if you do not know of this or haven't heard of it, it's great. There's a DVD, which was a snapshot of it from, I think, August of a year ago. But it has literally every picture taken on the moon. It has small video of every bit of TV transmission made from the moon on all the missions, and I think it's about $35. But not only that, it has a transcript. It has a moment-by-moment, mission elapsed time transcript of all the Capcom communications and everything that they did. And when they come along and say, at this point, Buzz took a picture of the ALSEP rig or something like that. But anyway, what Richard was able to do is to go back and look at the transcripts and see exactly when would that break have been that Buzz took his communion ceremony for. So in doing that, they were able to reconstruct it and find out that it was 33 minutes after landing, about 103 hours, I think, into the flight. That was their first break. There's a 1-minute break in communications where there's nothing going back and forth between the lunar module and NASA, Capcom back at Houston. So then it occurred to him, well, the Egyptian religion is a stellar religion. Osiris is represented by Orion. Isis is represented by Sirius. Horus is represented by Leo, or the sun. It depends on, what particular myth you're reading. So back in those days, there was the availability, and there still is, of astronomy software, which nobody at NASA ever thought probably would ever exist. There was Redshift 2. This is the one that Richard uses and I use. I love it because it's simple, it's straightforward, and it is based on the JPL database. So it's exactly the same thing that they are using. So what he did was he decided to plug in the date and the time. This is an example of what's contained in there. You can place yourself anywhere in the solar system, on the surface of Mars, next to the face. You can place yourself on the surface of the moon at the Apollo 11 landing site. You can place yourself next to the Great Pyramids at Giza. You can put yourself anywhere and take a look at the sky at just about any time back to, I think, 4500 BC and forward in time several thousand more years. So what they did was they plugged in the date and the time and the coordinates for that particular communion ceremony, 33 minutes after landing. And what he found was that over that landing site, the star Sirius, Isis, was exactly, and literally exactly, at 19.5 degrees, 19.5 degrees. The same hyperdimensional number that kept coming up in the ruins at Sidonia. So that was, in his mind and mine, significant. So as we begin to ask the question, why would they do this? What could be so important about this, and what was Buzz Aldrin really trying to do? What was his thinking? Ken again pointed us in the direction of a book called The Hiram Key. This is by Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas. They're two Masons. And as Ken pointed out, Buzz Aldrin, like he, was a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason at the time that he went on Apollo and performed this communion ceremony. What they did, Knight and Lomas, is to basically reconstruct the history of Masonry. In their determination, it went far beyond the 1724 or 1717 date of creation that the craft traditionally gives. And they said, in fact, the true history of Freemasonry stretches all the way back to the building of the first Temple of Solomon. And ultimately, at its root, the rituals that Freemasonry performs are designed as an homage to the legends of, guess what, Isis and Osiris and Horus and Seth. So again, we had this Egyptian connection. And as we looked at the landing site for Apollo 11, basically it could not have been more boring. I understand that they wanted to be safe here, but the bottom line is they landed in the middle of nowhere. It was flat, there were very few craters, there was no mountains, there was no rough terrain. It was certainly a safe place to land, but it was also a really, really boring place to land. However, it was the only place that you could have landed at that particular date, July 20th, which corresponds to that heliacal rising of Sirius, and have exactly 33 minutes later, Sirius at 19.5 degrees above that landing site. It was the only place on the face of the moon that would have worked. So the canonical story is that as they were descending down to the lunar surface, and they were getting all this feedback from the radar, and they were getting these master alarms on their computers, that Neil Armstrong looked down and saw a bunch of boulders, and these boulders were so big that he had to move the lunar module landing site someplace else. He had to basically take it by the stick, move it, lean forward, and fly across the lunar surface to the new real landing site. Well, this is a picture looking back along the path of the LEM, the way it came in on that day. And I don't see any boulders. This plane is so flat, you should be able to see for 5, 6, maybe 10 miles. And again, in the myth, it's 5 miles that they flew past the original landing site. What was probably really going on was that they were getting feedback. The reason the computers were overwhelmed is that they were getting feedback on their exact coordinates that they needed to be at to get this alignment to work for the stars 33 minutes later. Now, there's another picture of the landing site. These are in a different direction, and those really aren't, they look kind of big in this picture, but they're not. They're about the size of your fist, maybe a little bit bigger. Some of them may be slightly larger. But you can see it's really a pretty boring open terrain. So the one advantage that Tranquility Base had was that it was the only place on the moon that 33 minutes after landing, you could have Sirius at 19.5 degrees, the goddess Isis, literally. So the question became, was Aldrin's offering really an offering to Isis, to Osiris? And what does this 19.5 degrees and the 33 minutes have to do with it? Now, at the same moment that they were doing this, they were landing and performing this ritual, at the future Apollo 12 landing site, you had Orion on the horizon. Now, in the Egyptian religion, the horizon is a really significant position. 19.5 and 33 degrees are not real significant as far as anybody can tell to those in those ancient stellar religions as they're understood at this time. But the horizon and the meridian, which is the north-south line that goes directly overhead, were real significant. When Orion was moving up or down, rising or falling across the horizon, it was, as far as the Egyptians were concerned, either being born or dying. They considered it a constant cycle of birth and resurrection. So it's almost as if the Apollo 11 and Apollo 12 landing sites were like temples. They were coordinated. They were two places where the stars were going to be correct for this particular ritual. Now, the interesting thing in looking at the Apollo 12 handheld photography is that there are virtually no pictures of Neil Armstrong on the moon. There is one sort of from the back where Buzz happened to catch part of him as he was standing by the LEM. All the other pictures, all the traditional canonic pictures that we've seen are of Buzz Aldrin. This is Buzz Aldrin on the moon, not Neil Armstrong. Here's a close-up where they've taken the gold. These gold visors are really important, and I think Richard might talk about those later, but these gold visors were used to filter out, supposedly, ultraviolet light.